organization, one of the UN agencies, and the agency responsible for labor. In our work here in Bangkok, we focus on work in fishing and seafood specifically, but this is among many other aspects of work in Thailand and in the region that the ILO works on. I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about what it is the ILO's Ship-to-Shore Rights project is doing and how it fits with what you've already heard. The ILO's role in the Benjina and Ambon stories was minor, but those stories have played an important role in the work of the ILO in the years since. This project began in 2016, at about the same time that the EU's yellow card was laid on, that the Thai government was downgraded, or its efforts against trafficking were downgraded in the State Department report, and about the same time that the Associated Press series ran, The Guardian, the New York Times. It was a crisis in the Thai fishing and seafood industry. The ILO was asked to do four things specifically. One is to work with all of our partners. That includes government, employers, worker organizations, civil society organizations, on the legal framework. So, in the ILO's opinion, what was missing between what Thai law already said about work in fishing, for example, and the ILO's standards? And for the ILO, there are two important standards, two conventions that we encourage the Thai government to ratify. One is the Forced Labor Protocol, which was ratified just in the last 10 days. And I think today in Geneva, the Minister of Labor presented the ratification by the Thai government to my boss, the Director General of the ILO. This is a big deal. This makes Thailand the first member country, the first country in Asia to ratify this protocol. And we're still waiting to see the law that follows. The draft act advances the fight against forced labor in terms of victim protection, for example, new provisions for victims of forced labor. If there's interest, we can talk more about what's in the draft act and what the protocol does. But this was one of the two things that the ILO was asked to work with the government and others on. The second is rules for work in fishing. And if you work in fishing, you know there aren't a lot of rules written for fishing. Lots of labor law written for work on land, but very little written for work on board fishing vessels. This is true in Thailand, but it's true around the world. So the ILO has a convention, it's number 188, and it sets a global standard for work in fishing with regard to hours and wages and safety and health, and rules for repatriation, and how to handle injuries on board. Fishing is a dangerous business. So as part of this project and part of the government's response to the crisis in fishing, it committed to ratify both the Forced Labor Protocol and Convention 188. So the government is at work now with worker organizations, employer organizations on what a draft act that fills the gap for work in fishing would look like. And the ILO plays a role there. In a sense, we offer technical advice, and we're the glue. We help hold the parties together and get them to argue constructively about what belongs in the law. The second big job that the ILO was asked to help with is enforcement. And as you know, getting new rules on paper can be the easy part. Hard as it is, it's sometimes the easy part, and it's enforcement, making it stick on board a vessel, at the port level, in a seafood processing factory, that can be hardest. So the ILO is working with the government, and again with worker organizations and employer organizations, to make sure that enforcement efforts, inspection by the Ministry of Labor, by the Department of Fisheries, by the Navy, all the parties involved in fishing, that those inspections are intensive, and where there's a violation, it leads to an enforcement action. This is how you raise standards in the industry. And as part of this, the ILO concluded a survey. We did a survey of workers in seafood processing and in fishing in 10 provinces, about 435 workers, asking about working conditions, wages, hours, how are you recruited, what are living conditions like, what are you struggling with. And among the findings, we found, for example, that workers in fishing don't have written contracts or can't recall signing a written contract. Now, a written contract is fundamental to work, and only 42% of fishers told us, of the 200 that we interviewed, 42% told us that they could recall signing a written contract. And an even smaller number, a much smaller number, told us that they had a copy to keep. So as part of the enforcement effort, we're working with, again, employer organizations, worker organizations, and the government to get that number up. But I should note that when the ILO did a survey like this in 2014, the number was much, much lower. It was about 6%. So this is a good example. We see the number at a very low level before the crisis. We see some improvement. The number is now 42, 43%, and we're working together to get the number higher. We saw similar issues in pay. In the earlier survey, the ILO found that pay was considerably lower, and a lot of fishers were paid just a share of the catch. But in the new report, we see that most fishers are now paid a base monthly salary. But for a quarter of fishers, they reported that some of their pay is withheld. Sometimes 10 months, 15 months, 20 months. There are deductions from their pay, some of them legal, but some of them illegal. Some of them are in debt to their employers, or their skipper, or the supervisor on board. So as part of the enforcement effort, the ILO has worked with the government and the employers and worker organizations to move from a cash payment scheme to electronic payments, so that there's a way to track payments to fishers. In truth, pay in Thai fishing is a tangled mess, and the fact that it's still done in cash without decent records is a big part of the problem. So enforcement is number 2. 3 is helping the industry itself raise standards. So what does Thai law require? What is the global standard for work in fishing and seafood processing? And how do we help employers improve standards? Well, part of it is just explaining what the standard is. In some instances, when new rules are written, and there have been a lot of new rules in fishing over the last few years, the vessel owners are unclear about what the standard is. So that's part of the job. Another is working with the associations like Thai Tuna and Thai Frozen Foods and NFAT and others to make sure their members understand what the rules are and what they're going to do, what changes they're going to make to meet the legal standard and then to meet the global standard. Export of Thai seafood is a big contributor to this economy, so meeting the global standard is important. It means remaining competitive in markets like the EU and the UK, the United States, Australia, and elsewhere. And fourth is a big investment on the part of the project in worker activities, and that means lots of things. Among other things, it means educating workers on how to open a bank account, how to use an ATM card, how to maintain control over your money. So lots of worker education campaigns, and work with migrant worker families in Pattani on Wednesday of next week. Time's up. On Wednesday of next week, Tuesday of next week, the International Day Against Child Labor, the ILO and Stella Maris will open an education center for Cambodian children in the port in Pattani. These are just examples of the kinds of work we're doing with regard to worker activities. The question about what is a union and who decides this was asked, and you'll see it in the letter. The ILO was asked by the ITF, a global union that represents fishers and workers in transport, if proposed changes to Thai regulations were a violation of ILO standards. And the ILO sets standards for all matters related to work, including the right to organize and the right to bargain collectively. These are two core labor standards for the ILO. Their numbers, convention numbers 87 and 98. The question or the challenge from the ITF went to my bosses in Geneva, who asked the government to explain what it was doing. The government is replied to the ILO, and that's all the action there is. I think in the packet you've got all the letters. In the letter from LPN, it says that the ILO has asked or has demanded that LPN suspend its efforts, but the ILO has no such power, has made no such demand, and we'll wait on Geneva to respond if it deems it necessary to the government's reply. I'll be happy to send LPN's letter to the appropriate people in Geneva. I'll do that tomorrow. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you for finally addressing the elephant in the room somehow. So.